You know, when we hear about the reconstruction of Ukraine, we usually think about rebuilding cities, right? Bricks and mortar. But what if the real project is something else entirely? Today, we're diving into a really compelling analysis that says Ukraine is actually a testing ground, a blueprint for a new kind of global control.
And right off the bat, the analysis we're looking at makes this incredibly bold claim. This isn't some far-off theory. The argument is that this system is live. It's up and running right now in the real world. So here's the core idea we're going to unpack. The argument is that Ukraine's massive reconstruction effort is actually the first ever countrywide test of something the source calls conditional sovereignty. It's a really provocative idea, and honestly, it's at the heart of this entire thing.
Okay, so to really get what's being argued here, we have to start with that key concept. What in the world is conditional sovereignty? Think of it like this. A country is in crisis. It needs help to survive. But that help comes with some serious strings attached. The source defines this as a situation where your very survival is tied to letting outside international groups monitor and even control how your government works. Basically, your sovereignty is now conditional on you playing by their rules.
But how could you ever get a whole country to agree to that? Well, the source argues that the secret ingredient is always a crisis, an emergency that opens up the political space for truly radical changes that would never happen otherwise. And I gotta say, this metaphor they use is powerful, a universal solvent. You know, just like a chemical that can dissolve almost anything, the claim here is that a huge emergency just dissolves all the normal political pushback, all the debate you'd expect to see against such massive changes.
And what you get is this massive contrast in how decisions get made. Normally, in a democracy, things are slow. You've got debates, public meetings, approvals, all that stuff. But under an emergency framework, all of that gets swept aside. It allows for super fast, top-down adoption of brand new systems, and it's all justified by the crisis of the moment.
So this is how it works on the ground. This comprehensive control system is framed as just generous help, as aid. And that makes anyone who resists look ungrateful, right? And here's the really crucial part. The new infrastructure that gets installed during the crisis, all the digital systems, the new rules, it's not meant to be temporary. It's designed from the ground up to be permanent.
Okay, so that's the big picture theory, but what does it actually look like? Well, the source gets super specific. It identifies 6 interconnected mechanisms that it claims are the engine driving this whole system.
So yeah, there are 6 of them. But the key thing to understand isn't just what they are individually. It's how they're designed to lock together, like gears in a machine, creating this complete system of oversight that's almost impossible to get out of.
Let's break this engine down. First up, certification. This means EU-approved groups are the only ones who get to play in the reconstruction. It's a gatekeeper. Second, financial strings. The aid money from places like the IMF isn't free. You have to adopt their specific digital government reforms to get it. Third, you've got the digital ID. Access to basic services gets funneled through this national digital ID system called DIA. That's a central choke point. Fourth, mandatory auditing. International companies use blockchain to track every single dollar, so all the money is watched externally. Fifth is data sharing. These new digital twin projects create virtual copies of cities, which basically hardwires international monitoring right into the country's infrastructure. And finally, procurement control. Government contracts are run on a system that automatically enforces international rules. You see how they all connect? They control who can play, where the money goes, how citizens get services, and they watch all the data and the contracts. It's a full package.
And when you weave all 6 of those mechanisms together, the source's conclusion is pretty stark. A huge power shift happens. The national government still looks like a government, but the real decision-making power, the authority over money and policy, has moved to these outside, international bodies.
And this brings us to the final, and maybe the most mind-blowing part of the argument. The source claims Ukraine isn't the endgame. It's just the prototype. So the big question is, how could this blueprint be scaled up to go global?
Well, according to this analysis, the vehicle to take this whole model global might already exist. It's called the UN Emergency Platform, and it's a framework designed specifically to be switched on during what they call complex global shocks.
The argument here is that you can draw a direct line. The very same systems being tested in Ukraine, like the DIA digital ID for people or the Prozoro system for government contracts, they could just be plugged into these larger global frameworks. They could be turned on by something like a new WHO pandemic treaty or flipped on by the UN Emergency Platform itself.
And we're not just talking about war as a trigger here. The source suggests that a whole menu of crises could be used to activate this global template. Things like future health emergencies, major climate events, massive cyber attacks, or even a global financial meltdown.
Which brings us to what might be the single most important takeaway from this whole analysis. The infrastructure that gets put in place during an emergency is not a temporary fix. The digital IDs, the auditing systems, the new rules, all of it is designed to become permanent, fundamentally changing how a country is run long after the crisis is over.
And this final quote from the source just ties a perfect bow on the entire argument. The idea is that an emergency is the pathway, Ukraine is the blueprint, and a global body like the UN Emergency Platform is the switchboard that could turn this system on for the whole planet.
So, at the end of the day, what we've looked at here is a blueprint for a totally new kind of governance, one that's born out of crisis and built on technology. The source doesn't really give us a final answer, but it leaves us with a really critical question to think about. When does help given in an emergency cross the line and become permanent control?